In today's video, we're going to have a look at how to determine the formula when the input as well as output values are given. Example 1. Determine the rule or formula for the following flow diagram. The rule or formula tells you what happens to the input values to form the output values. So you need to recognize the pattern. For this, you can rely on your previous knowledge on number patterns. If we look at our output values, there is a constant difference of 4 between the terms. You need to add 4 every time to get to the next value. A constant difference means you are working with a linear number pattern, and that is why we can immediately start our formula by taking the input value and multiplying it with this constant difference. Next, we need to determine whether this is the complete formula or whether there's still an adjustment that needs to be made. For this, we can test any of the input values. So, if I substitute 0 directly into the formula we have at the moment, we have 4 times 0, which is 0. But the output value should be 1. That means we still need to add 1 to our formula. This formula can now be tested using another input value. So if I substitute 1, I will have 4 times 1, which is 1, and then add 1 to get the correct output value of 5. So here the rule or formula will be 4 times x plus 1. Example 2. Determine the rule for the following table. Once again, we are given input and output values, and we need to determine the pattern. Looking at the output values, I can once again see a constant difference. This time the difference is -2. So, for my rule, I'm once again going to start off saying, take this constant difference of -2 and multiply it with the input value. Now I'm going to test whether this is the complete rule or whether I still need to make an adjustment. And for that, I can substitute any input value. I'm going to choose to input -3. So I will have -2 times -3, which is 6. But the correct output value is 8, and that means I still need to add 2 to my formula. To test whether this is correct, I can once again substitute any input value into this formula, and I'm going to substitute 1. This will be -2 times 1, which is -2, and then when I add 2, I get the correct output value of 0. That means my final rule is y is equal to -2x plus 2. Example 3. Here we are given a table and once again asked to determine the formula for the table. If you have a look at the input values in the table, you will realize that these are not consecutive numbers, but that only every second value is given here. This is important to take into account when you determine the pattern. If we now have a look at the output values, you will see that there is a constant difference of 10 between these values. But it is now important to remember that these are not consecutive values and that the constant difference between consecutive values will actually be +5. So I'm going to start off my formula by saying that I can determine the output value by taking 5 times the input value. Next, we need to test whether this is the complete formula, and to do that, I'm going to substitute the input value of -2. That will give me 5 times -2, which is -10, but the correct output value is actually -8. This means I still need to add 2 to get my correct output value of -8. The final formula will then be y is equal to 5x plus another 2. Question B. Determine the values of A and B. A is an input value. You can now choose to either follow the pattern to determine A, or you can use algebra. Looking at the output values, we can see that from 12 we added 30 to get to the specific output value. We've just determined that to get to the next output value, we add 5. This means to add 30, we will have to add 6 times 5. Repeating this for the input values, we need to move from the second value 6 values further, and that will give us 8. That means that the A value is 8. But as I've mentioned, you could also use algebra. We now have a formula to determine the input and output values. We were given that the output value, the Y value, is 42, and that means we can now solve the A value or the input value. So now we're going to subtract 2 on the left-hand side to get 40. And if I now divide both sides by 5, I will end with an A value of 8. To determine B, we can once again either complete the pattern or do some algebra. Looking at the table, we can see that we have to move from 8 to an input value of 12, which means 4 spaces forward. We saw that the Y value, every space moved, increases by 5, which means we need to add 4 5s. If we do that, we will get a B value of 62. Or we could use the formula again. In this case, the input value or X value was given as 12. So we will have 5 times 12 plus 2, which also gives us 62.